The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Registration is open for No Longer Virtual, coming up February 26th and 27th, 2024 in Missoula, Montana. Limited to 25 participants, you make this event meaningful. Topics for the sessions this year include managing life and work as an entrepreneur or internal innovator, finding creativity at work, using Agile, the project structure usually associated with IT work, to improve communication and outcomes in your non-tech business, and so much more. Every session is hosted by the people who attend. No keynotes. All sessions are interactive workshops to get the most out of those side conversations and leverage all of the great experience that's already in the room. But what people who attend NLV say they value the most about this summit is the relationships they build that continue to support and nurture them at work and in their career throughout the year and well into the future. Early registration is extended through January 15th, 2024, and there are a few spots left. So join us. Don't miss this opportunity. Register at elkinsconsulting.com. Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker at Elkins Consulting. And when I talk about being a chief storymaker, what I'm saying is that if you want to be a good storyteller, you have to make them first, which means oftentimes stepping out of your comfort zone. And my guest today is a great example of stepping out of a comfort zone in many ways. And lucky for me, I've already had a chance to speak with his brother. So welcome to Jake Cinti. I spoke with Dylan just a few weeks ago. They own Yarrow Properties, I think is what it's called. And the reason Yarrow is sticky in my head is because the Yarrow plant here in Montana is all over the mountain behind my house. It's known as a medicinal plant, and I think it's just a great name for the projects that they are taking on. So Jake, welcome to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. It's great to connect with you, and love that I'm getting an opportunity to help build and embellish the story that we're starting to put together out here in Michigan.
Thank you. So tell me, confirm the name of the company.
Yarrow is the name
Yarrow.
of the company. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into what you do in just a little bit, but let's start with my traditional ritualistic habit forming question that I've been asking for over 300 episodes. I'd love to hear something about you that most people might not know. And as our listeners will know, I love to ask this question because it gives some dimension to the person that we're going to be hearing stories from. And what I'm finding more and more, especially in this age of polarization, social media, we tend to see people in single dimension based on one interaction or one post. And by asking this question, I'm opening up so that we can see each other in multi-dimensions. So what kind of story do you have to share with us?
Awesome. I'm going to take, and I'm going to assume that the group of people who may not know about this thing about me are folks who are seeing my output in the real estate world, which is what's most prolific, I would say, about me. So I'm going to focus on something that my close friends know. So I'm a musician and a nonprofit person by trade, and played maybe 12 different instruments throughout my life. I was in a number of different bands, and currently one of the kind of side projects that I'm a part of is I am one of the founding board members for a nonprofit in Denver, Colorado, that spawned out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it is a youth-driven mobile recording studio and out-of-school songwriting, beat making, and production organization that serves schools throughout the Denver area that don't have access to adequate music education as part of their core curriculum. Yeah.
That is awesome. Oh my gosh, you just made my whole day hearing that. And part of what just resonated with me, so to speak, is that my husband and I were just in Paris for a couple of weeks, and we were getting back 1 week before a performance. And it was just going to be the two of us. We usually have a bass player or a drummer sit in with us to fill out the sound. And because we were gone for 2 weeks, we wanted to find a place to practice. And my husband did not bring a guitar with him because we didn't have a performance scheduled. We found a studio space called Luna Rosa, and it is just outside of the main part of Paris. It was like a 20-minute train ride, which is a big deal in Paris because everything's so close. And they had all these rooms completely kitted out with bass amp, guitar amp, PA, a little drum kit, or a couple of them had like the full drum kit. And they had like 20 of them. And they rented us a guitar, which was actually a really cool hollow body Fender style guitar. It's very cool.
Nice.
And a microphone. And we rented it twice for 2 hours each. And it was €26 each
That's
time.
amazing.
It was next to nothing.
Are they a nonprofit?
They must be. There's no way they could be making a profit off this. And the second time we went in, Euro Disney was using their space for auditions for kids.
Wow.
So we walked in, the place is full of kids singing and practicing and warming up for their auditions. It was so cool. And now here you're telling me that you have this movable feast of music recording option for students who don't otherwise have access to that. You just warmed my heart. That's awesome.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm so glad. And I in part said it because I knew you have a musical background. So I thought it would resonate. And I wanted to put in a shameless plug for Mobile Studio, the nonprofit in Denver. So
what is it called?
It's called Mobile Studio.
Oh, okay. So that leaves it open to a lot of different opportunities.
Yep.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great plug. And we'll make sure that we have links to it in the show notes associated with this podcast so people can make donations to that. I know that's one of the first things I'm going to do is make an Elkins Consulting donation to that nonprofit because it speaks to me, obviously. Awesome. And my brother lives in Denver, so I'll make sure that he gets a hold of this as well. So thank you. For our listeners, don't worry about stopping and pausing or whatever. You can find this in the show notes at elkinsconsulting.com under the podcast page. Jake, thank you. That's awesome.
Of course.
So let's get into this real estate, music, all these other side hustle things, nonprofits. You said that your primary interest has been nonprofits and music. So how did you transition? What was the story of transitioning into real estate?
Yeah, it's a good. It's an interesting transition. Well, it was an abrupt transition. So I'm actually in my youth, I was part of a relatively prolific nonprofit in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area. There's a nonprofit called Neutral Zone. It's an out of school program that has programming from music to literary arts to leadership, community organizing, and everything is youth led. So I had a ton of agency as a young person, was very involved in both art and community organizing. And later on, that was sort of a through line into my educational career, and sort of just outside of my education. I'm a social worker by trade. So I actually have I got an MSW with a focus on nonprofit management, and I was actually working with the Neutral Zone, helping them with a consultancy that works with other nonprofits throughout the country to build capacity for youth leadership. So I was helping build youth advisory councils. I was helping develop board recruitment strategies focused on youth leadership. But ultimately, this to me, as far as my goals, was a form of capacity building for socially impactful nonprofit organizations. That's what I gravitated towards. So the consultative aspect of of that work. It's more macro. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't pursuing the more therapeutic type of social work.
Right. Or direct services. Right.
Right. That's for the better angels, I guess. But I wanted to continue doing that work in some capacity, but make a transition and relocate. And I ended up just by chance learning about what is now my current role and connecting with my current colleagues. At the time, it was part of a large commercial real estate company called Transwestern. They have offices in, I think, like every major city, like 33 different offices. They do every type of real estate, from development to property management to tenant representation and brokerage. There was a very small team within that company that was focused on nonprofit real estate, which seemed really interesting. It seemed oxymoronic in a way, just because.
But critical, absolutely critical with our housing crisis across the country.
Yeah. Housing and a lot of other things, especially where it was located in New York City. And so I learned a little bit more about it and ended up taking on a job there. And I relocated to New York, kind of without a super clear idea of what I was going to be doing, and absolutely no business or real estate acumen outside of my org studies sort of background. Obviously I'm still there. I'm still doing that work. And so clearly it's become quite a passion and quite a impactful niche. So in addition to there's a number of different incentive programs and ways for nonprofits to creatively structure real estate transactions that can be financially beneficial. And then in addition to that, nonprofit space needs, especially client-facing nonprofits, for example, social service organizations, in addition to needing to find creative ways to afford space in a city like New York, their space also is novel in the way it functions and relative to a typical, for example, office space, and needs to be mission aligned. So part of what I do is I work with organizations from the incipient stages of their strategic plan, which often includes a facilities component, to help with ideation around why they have space, how that space can be best aligned with their mission and services, and then to actually transact on that strategy using a number of different available incentives. So we're often I work with all types of nonprofits. We focus more specifically on educational nonprofits. So I work with a lot of schools, social service organizations, arts and culture organizations. But I mean, we kind of run the gamut. Any nonprofit that has a social impact is what falls into that category. So it's a very small niche in the real estate world, but something that is growing. At this point, we've quadrupled in size and created our own company. So it's now that we're affiliated with Transwestern, but we're our own company. It's called Open Impact Real Estate. So we're an MWBE based in New York and active all over the country.
Wow. Can you, for our listeners, explain what the WOMBE
minority
is?
and women. So we're certified minority and women in business, which is not only, I mean, on one end, it allows us to support government real estate projects, for example. And then also it's important to us and very important to the groups that we work with oftentimes to have a mission aligned organization, oftentimes an MWBE. So we're very diverse. We're obviously we're women led, and most of we're all brokers. We're commercial real estate brokers. So I'm a commercial real estate broker, but we all have alternative backgrounds. So we recruit people from backgrounds in affordable housing, social work, environmental studies, deliberately to have a more holistic, to be able to have expertise in actually the issues that our clients are dealing with.
That sounds amazing. Wow. So tell me, when you think of a recent client-facing experience that you had, um, I'm guessing you get this a lot, but just think of one in particular that was recent, a situation where you just felt so satisfied walking away from it that you were just like, I am in exactly the place where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. So just out of caution, I won't be super specific, but I'm sure
No,
folks
no, no.
listening to
Yeah,
this
no
will be able
names.
to figure out what I'm talking about. But one of the projects I'm most proud of, and still feel like I'm walking away kind of feeling proud of it, even though it was a couple of years ago. Um, so we worked with a harm reduction center in New York City. So an organization that provides critical public health services primarily to folks who use needles.
Yeah.
So they provide life-saving services in addition to oftentimes a model that does involve safe injection. So whether it's providing clean needles or also supervised needle use, which is obviously highly controversial. And because of that, they had been evicted from their space, I think about a year prior, and they were operating out of a Winnebago. And they refused to stop services. They kept pressing on, but they were operating out of a an RV
RV, a giant
in
RV.
Washington, in northern Manhattan, and they had been blamed by the community for the fallout that happened when they relocated because people started to use elsewhere, and there were a lot of deaths. It was a whole debacle, and they needed space, and it is one of the hardest sells when we're representing a tenant. Oftentimes, landlords they can't be discriminatory, as a matter of law, but when it comes to the use of the space, they can discretionarily reject certain uses, and this is
Sure.
one that 99.9% of landlords would say absolutely not. We can't have this use in a multi-tenant building.
For good reason to assert. I mean, it's
Right, it depends who
reasonable
else
to
is in
be
there.
concerned
It
about it.
makes, yeah,
Right.
yeah. But of course, and so we understood that, and we also understood that from a community and impact standpoint, it was so critical that this organization be there. That they were located and stayed located in one of the areas of Manhattan with the highest concentration of needle users, so we were able to. Over a long period of time, we pounded the pavement and worked with them enough. We were able to find and convince a landlord to provide a turnkey harm reduction center and overdose prevention center right across the street from where their Winnebago is parked, allowing substantially more foot traffic and a completely, honestly, like it's a white glove overdose prevention center. And once it opened, I went and visited, I think about a couple of weeks after it opened. They had prevented on average 3 fatal overdoses per day, and that otherwise the folks would have died. And so it's what showed me that the space, being able to have space, was, in this case, it was literally
Life or
saving
death.
people's lives. And so, that's I think a microcosm in general for how important space can be for social impact.
So now I'm super curious about the resulting community impact of having that located in that place. I mean, are they seeing increased homelessness in that area? Or decreased? Has there been a positive impact in that way?
So as far as homelessness, I don't think that it's changed substantially. They are seeing decreased incidents of remote fatalities due to overdoses, because those folks spread into the nearby parks, under bridges, and when they didn't have a
Right.
space to go to, but now it's concentrated in one location. So there is a significant, there's a huge public health impact in that area.
Yeah.
And it's a model that's existed. I mean, Canada, they've been doing this since the 80s, 0% fatality rate since the 1980s. And it took this long to get it over the line in the United States. It's amazing.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
but yeah, so
So tell me about you. You walked in to visit a week after they opened, or however long it was. And what did you see that was like, wow, I participated in this. I was,
yeah, I mean, I saw a pristine facility that had these these stations where folks could come in and they could sit and they could use they were using, you know,
heroin or
heroin,
whatever.
and there was a mirror right in front of them, and there was a 1-to-1 staff ratio of staff members trained to the extent of a registered nurse who could use that mirror to tell immediately, based on their pupils, they were going to overdose and immediately administer Narcan using best practices. You know, sometimes you administer too much, someone can start going into withdrawal right away. So
Right.
and it's a facility filled with clean needles, testing kit, fentanyl testing kits, Narcan in multiple different forms, and everyone is staffed. It was quiet. It was I will say quiet, relative to what you probably expect. And someone overdosed while I was there, and a staff member who was showing me through very calmly explained what was happening and what the nurse was doing, and so arguably, I think his life was saved, right then and there, and the way they handled it was dignified and very low risk. So it was jarring, of course, because that's not the area that I work in, but it was also quite beautiful to see that happening with as much dignity as possible.
Well, I was thinking about the impact on city services. It's such a positive impact because you don't have ambulances rushing around trying to get to somebody who's overdosing.
Right.
And so it probably ends up saving a ton of taxpayer dollars of not treating them at the hospital, not trying to revive them once they've already had a problem, and not trying to clean up a dead body from a park. So, wow. I'm just thinking about all the different potentials for impact. And you may not have the answer to this, and it's something I'm sure some of our listeners will be curious about is how many of those who almost overdose, almost die, actually end up getting into some sort of treatment to reduce their use once they
Yeah.
realize that they almost killed themselves. If that's,
Right.
clearly
I
they
mean,
don't want to die if
yeah.
if they're shooting up in a facility like that. Their
Right.
intention is not to overdose.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I would encourage listeners to look into the overdose prevention model, because it does seem ostensibly like it's just a way to it's condoning of ongoing use. But oftentimes it's a peer model. So oftentimes the staff members themselves either are active users or are in recovery and so there are slow but steady ways to mentor folks. And so there is a pipeline from overdose prevention into recovery. So it does have that impact as well.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And you got to be part of that, a foundational support to that, to saving lives.
Yeah, well, it was humbling, and I'm very proud to have had the opportunity to work with a group like that. They're some of the most amazing social
Generous,
workers I've ever met.
incredibly generous and selfless. So now I'm imagining you walking into this facility, having this sense of accomplishment and sadness and gratitude and all those conflicting feelings of experiencing that. And then you transition into this by day, you're doing all this commercial real estate with nonprofits in New York City. And then by night, you're then turning around and running the business aspect of Yarrow with your brother, Dylan. And for our listeners, you'll want to listen to that other episode with Dylan because he really gets deeply into the why behind their work in Ypsilanti, just outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, renovating old properties to be really beautiful, useful, livable homes for people that are actually within reach financially. So, for instance, one of the apartments that Dylan remodeled has they uncovered a hidden fireplace. They made it feel like home, and teachers, a couple, a man and woman that are married, that are teachers, walked into one of these apartments and said, oh, it just feels like home before they even looked at the rest of the place. And they are living in one of these places now. And if two teachers on their salaries, which we know is just absurd,
Right.
if they can afford this beautiful remodeled apartment in a nice part of Ypsilanti, right downtown, where they can walk around to the different stores and the storefronts, I mean, that just gave me chills when he talked about that. So tell me about that a little bit. Maybe a story. Again, because this is a story podcast,
Right.
maybe again, a similar situation. That's the story that Dylan told me about how it felt to do the business that he does. And it wasn't him that overheard this couple saying that. It was the agent that was showing them the apartment. Um, so tell me about that.
Well, I mean I think that is that's a great example. Another one actually, and it's the same. It's one of our properties I think probably has the most historic presence, and it's located on a large plot of land. There's a very large yard. Part of what really drew us to it is that there's a community garden, or what had become a community garden, that tenants were collaborating on, and we had two of our tenants at the time were both similar young folks who were working in the, I think, humanities department at Eastern and at U of M, and we worked with them to help them get chickens, because they wanted to have chickens, and we were super about it. We thought it would really it would be cool for the other tenants. It would be a great addition to the community garden that was already in place. So we made it happen. I mean, they got these chickens, and we were kind of helping take care of them where necessary. But it's the kind of thing where I think one differentiating factor is that you might get an eyebrow raise from a lot of landlords or property owners for something like that, and we were like, yes, this is great, let's do it. And they were so they were thrilled, so I think that's just in terms of micro stories, that's a fun one.
That's awesome. Well, there's nothing like chickens to build community, right?
Right. Exactly.
I mean that because I live in a small town in Montana, and it is so meaningful to me when somebody gives me eggs from their chickens that were raised right next door, and they're eating really healthy table scraps, right? And I can bring over my table scraps to my friend's house, and those chickens just go to town on them.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love that. And sometimes we'll trade around here. I have a friend with a community garden plot that grows ridiculous amounts of vegetables in her small plot, and she'll trade me vegetables for challah dough, which is you know this, but it's the dough that makes challah, which is a Jewish braided bread that we eat on the Sabbath and festivals. And I'll make a big batch of challah dough and trade her for that, for vegetables or eggs from the chickens nearby. So that is definitely a community value right there. But no roosters.
No, I don't think that there were any roosters. We might have had to check with other folks in the building and make sure they were cool with that. Because if anybody sleeps in, then
no, there are many communities that actually won't allow roosters in the community. And they're not so great for the chickens because they fertilize the eggs. So you really don't want those anyway.
Right.
And they're noisy.
But and I like, great story, in response. It's also something cool that creating kind of where we can find that opportunity to create kind of micro communities within a piece of real estate, whether it's one multifamily building or multiple adjacent. It's something that we think is very special and very important, and also hyper local, which is a big part of Ypsilanti and how we hope to continue to work with and for Ypsilanti to sort of further its
Mhm.
very sort of proud and hyper local MO.
Culture, right.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean by hyperlocal because when I buy beef, it's from a ranch literally less than 100 miles from my house. So I get hyperlocal. What do you mean by hyperlocal in Ypsilanti?
And I don't know if it's to that extent, because I think it's also, I think, relative certainly to a place like Ann Arbor. It's more under resourced, but I guess more so, there's there's a lot bigger focus on local businesses. I think that's prioritized by the city as far as downtown development, um, and um, and then also just that it's somewhat, it's a tight town. I think there's a lot of sort of town pride. Folks know each other. Um, and so I guess
Right.
that's what I mean. As far as is the wheat for the bread coming from Ypsilanti? Probably not. But I'd
It
be
might be
if
coming
that
from
if
Montana.
someday, yeah, right. If someday that's the case, then that's ideal. I think it's part of bringing more resources into something without changing it beyond what we call it, the original
Mhm.
residents
Right.
recognize.
What I love about this, there's so much to love about this, but one of the things that came to mind is I'm a landlord. My husband and I own a small fourplex in town about a mile from our house. The property was built around the same time of our house, which is around 1890.
Yeah.
And what I love about what you just said was that your tenants can go to Dylan and say, "Hey, we have this idea. We kind of want chickens, right? Or we kind of want to do this community garden, or we're thinking a rooftop garden or whatever." And Dylan's like, "Let me think about it." Not, no, absolutely not, but let me think about it. Let me talk to Jake and we'll see what we can do. And it's may still be a no, but because of the nature of your business and the relationships that Dylan builds with the residents themselves, they know that they can ask him. They're not going to just say no. They're not going to dismiss you. And I know as a landlord, that relationship is critical. It's a critical factor, first of all, to the safety of our property and the well-being of our property. Our tenants love living where they live. So they take good care of it and they watch out for us and they watch out for the neighbors' properties. So it just,
Right. It's
oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. It's a I think, I'm glad that I'm glad you agree from experience with this, but because I think, I even felt this way before I was had anything to do with real estate. But because I'm both me and Dylan are progressives, and I think to the extent where before I had more insight into what real estate could do in a meaningful way, I kind of would peg landlords as just adversarial, just generally kind of a bad thing to be. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And there
and
are a lot of them out there. There are a lot of really
tons,
bad landlords out there.
most of them.
I would
But
agree with that.
yeah, but approaching it from a sort of collaborative community standpoint,
Mhm.
where yes, I own the property, yes, I have to, there's an extent to which I have to make money, but not not
Not
solely
at
for
the
the purpose of
expense
the
of
mark,
the
not at the
health and
expense
safety
of.
of the tenants,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. And let's I'm also interested in who our tenants are, and they're members of our community who we want to learn about, who we want to support in every way we can.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, when you think about it, it's what I love about what you're saying is that it's not. So I had some pretty negative experiences with our progressive candidates here in Helena, Montana, because I worked for the city. And we had this primarily, and I use air quotes, progressives on our commission when I worked there. And there were so many times where I just wanted to distance myself from them. I didn't even want to consider myself a progressive because all they were talking about was adding services, and never took away anything and never talked about revenue. So all of our city staff who were already working really hard and not making a ton of money because they're working for the city, great benefits and pretty good um, job security, but still like they were taking on more and more roles because there were more and more services, but no money to add more employees or to manage the maintenance costs of those services that we were starting up. So I got really frustrated with it. And then I became a landlord. And I was like, okay, this is really, that was great experience for me to see that, because I know I have to have revenue, because otherwise I can't support my tenants. I can't do improvements on the building when necessary if I'm not charging a reasonable amount of rent. And I think a lot of landlords don't think about it in that way. There have been times we've been burned a little bit, right? Like we
Oh
had a
yeah.
tenant that we had to kick out and it sucked. But I would not trade that for the experience that I gained and for the benefit that we've provided for the people who are there now.
Yeah.
So have you had a negative experience that was like, okay, this is why some landlords turn. This is why some
Of
landlords
course.
become not such good landlords.
I would say, of course, and I would say often. I mean, because we're scaling. We scale pretty quickly, and are continuing to do so. So yes, and the larger you are, then the more of
The
those
harder it
little
gets to
issues.
manage
Yeah,
it, right? Those
yeah,
little and then
uh,
become big issues.
yeah. And I mean, that's why I think it's where Dylan's also been very influential in this whole process. Is really creating and attaching ourselves to a kind of a vision and a mission that is community focused and socially conscious. So it almost works as a reminder to ourselves in those moments of what to focus on, and that these are speed bumps along the way, but it is absolutely not worth compromising your values, because you're dealing with a person or an organization who is incredibly difficult and who may or may not be costing you a lot of additional money. So kind of part of our business model is or a part of our outlook is that's par for the course. And I think further down the road, where right now we're focused on creating this impact through historic residential buildings, is that we also aim in the future is to transition and actually be developers. And then once you're doing that, you're dealing with public agencies and tenants, and every facet of the development world is very political, and it's probably 90% stuff like that, where that's very frustrating and
Yes.
could cause many folks to either become more
Jaded.
profit conscious or back out. And so it's I think we're always seeing the silver lining of staying on track, I think.
That's awesome. And what I understand this to be is that once you start getting to where you guys are going, where you're really scaling, we're satisfied with our one property. I'm not going more than that. But we're later in our careers. My husband and I are much later in our careers. But what speaks to me about this is this the knowledge that you are going to have to build a team of people that have that similar attitude to you, so that because you're not going to be able to be providing those direct relationships in the same way as you grow,
Yep.
it reminds me of what you've already learned through your social work, which is you have to build the right team of people that will provide those direct services as you would have if you were still at that level of relationships with them. And just like what you said at the very beginning of our conversation, there are the other angels to do that kind of work. And you're there to provide that foundational support for them to bring their best selves to what they want to do, which is probably more in the direct services, to
Right.
see their impact face to face, one at a time.
Well said.
Oh, I love that. I'm so looking forward to seeing how you build this team and what happens as you do it, because there have been successful people that have scaled this kind of project and kept the culture and the values and the ideals behind it. It does happen. It's rare and it's
Sure.
hard. But I think about even Patagonia is still doing that. And but then you see the opposite. You see the Starbucks situation where they started so great and
Yeah.
now they're being, labor driven because they weren't doing it right. And Target too was another one that was doing really, really well. And then they started tooting their horn about how, oh, we offer tuition reimbursement and benefits to our full-time employees. But I can tell you, my son worked at a Target here and very shortly figured out that they weren't giving him enough hours to be full-time intentionally so that he wouldn't
Oh,
qualify for those programs.
fine print. Some big fine print.
Yeah, or not unwritten. It's
Yeah.
more of an unwritten, like, well,
Unwritten.
we're not
Yeah.
going to give you quite enough hours, so you don't actually qualify for those benefits. So I'll be so curious and I'll be rooting for you. I'll be a major champion advocate as I see you grow, and I'm super excited to see where this goes.
Awesome. Well, likewise, and thank you. It's awesome to have your support, and we're excited too. I think we're at a stage where we're lean and we're kind of malleable. We have and so the ways we grow, I think we kind of it's kind of in a lot of ways it's kind of ad hoc. The ways we'll expand might be based on if we come across an opportunity to bid on or to be part of a development site sooner rather than later, then maybe we'll be adding that arm of the organization sooner, or whether it's that or property management or something else. Yeah.
Consciously. I love that. So there's one thing that I'd like to talk about just to wrap this full circle, wrap this back to you and Dylan as brothers, super close, super tight. One of my friends that is now a new friend, I met him through my younger son. So this man was in Missoula, Montana, visiting his son, who worked at the time with my son, who lived in Missoula. And Greg met Max and said, okay, this kid isn't coming from just school. What he's talking about isn't stuff he learned at school. Who are your parents? I want to know about your parents because this kid is extraordinary, which of course I'm like, oh yeah, of course he is. He's my kid. Everybody says
Yeah.
that. But I'm hearing your stories and Dylan's stories and the love with which you share them and the reality. It's not what I experienced in the city of all this. We want to give and give and give, but we're never going to talk about the cost of that. I'm hearing so much reality and consciousness in what you're saying. Tell me just briefly about your parents. Where did this
Yeah.
come from?
Well, I think it's our parents are a huge part of it, and then also our grandparents. I think so that's in there too. The so our my mother is a social worker, and then also throughout my whole life is an extremely active community member in the Ann Arbor area. She's involved with a ton of different nonprofit organizations. She works with 826 Michigan. She works with the Neutral Zone. She's been involved with. She was very actively involved with every school I went to. And on a very hands-on basis, she has a drama background and a writing background and a social work background. So those all came together in different ways. Either whether or not it involved me and my brother with our peers growing up, and so community embeddedness and the importance of community and of community organizations was instilled, I think, at a very, very, very early young age.
Mhm.
And our father's he's a physician and a professor at the medical school. And so as far as real estate stuff, he doesn't have a real estate background or a social work background, but I will say, one thing about what he does is that he's an infectious disease doc. He works with the VA. He also works at University of Michigan Hospital. But a big part of the population he serves is underserved, and ID or infectious diseases is one of the I would call it, in the medical field. It's where some of the better angels often end up. And so and he's always been kind of revered within his field, specifically for among other things, how he interacts with patients in a way that is empowering. It's all too often you have doctors who are delivering, difficult or bad news in a very scientific and unforgiving way that can be hard for families, and it's the exact opposite. And so those two things, my mom and my dad, I think, made us into it's community focused and thoughtful. And then our grandmother actually does have a real estate background and was a property manager back in the back a long time ago, and she was a city council member, so she's been involved on the more political level as well. And so she likes to say that skipped a generation, because she's been a big proponent and supporter of what we're doing in Michigan, and she also taught us at a very young age all about fiscal management, so about investment strategy and things like, when I was a little kid, knowing about compounding interest, knowing enough about the stock market to understand investment behavior, and then that translated into actual real estate acumen. I think maybe that's where I thought I didn't have that experience when I entered the real estate world. I guess I had some of it.
You did. You had influence, even if you didn't have experience with it.
Yep.
That's awesome. Wow. I'm not surprised at all to hear that. I would love to have a conversation with your parents and just let them know how highly I regard you and your brother Dylan. This has been such a treat to get to meet both of you and spend this time with you. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Sarah. Thank you. It's awesome. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you and learning more about what you seem to have all kinds of awesome things going on. And so I'm looking forward to staying in touch. And of course, if you reach out with anything else, we'd be happy to reconnect, whether it's via a podcast or otherwise. It's
music,
all the way out in Montana. Sure. Music, right? Yeah, I'll send you a link to Mobile Studio so you can drop it in there. Check it out.
That would be great. Yeah. I'm sure our listeners will want to learn more about that program. That's so cool. Just as a side, my niece went to school at the Denver School of Performing Arts for high school.
Awesome.
And stagecraft was one of her things. So, super tight ties here across the board. And I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk. So thanks again.
Of course. Thank you.
Listeners, it's your turn. What is something that you've been considering where you can contribute to your community? What is one small way that you can encourage somebody else to do something that you know will help within your community, will build something important? How can you support the people that you need to support in order to build a community that's healthy and caring for each other? It doesn't have to have a label. It doesn't have to be real estate. It doesn't have to be about homes and properties. It doesn't have to be even about helping people on a scale as to what we're talking about with Jake and Dylan. But even swapping dough, maybe it's pizza dough for you or sourdough with somebody who has chickens. Find somebody in your community, contribute, build those relationships. And let me know how that goes. Thanks so much for listening. Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you smile.